Hi. Hello. Welcome everyone to this week's EMFA talk, Follow the Money, State Advertising and the European Media Freedom Act. We will start very soon, but maybe if, I don't know whether Elda is here, just to give just a few welcome note kind of thing.
Yes, thank Diana. I just want to thank all the participants. First, this is the sixth so-called EMFA talk that we are organizing here at the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom at the European University Institute. I'm Ilda Brogi and I'm the Deputy Director of the Center. And the idea of these EMFA talks came from a discussion with some stakeholders and with in primis the European Federation of Journalists, but also with the Article 19, ECPMF, IPI, and CPJ. So the idea is to discuss some of the articles of the European Media Freedom Act in order to interpret them and take the best opportunities from the interpretation itself. So see what the Act can provide and try to exploit at best this piece of legislation that the European Union recently produced. So in this effort today we are speaking about Article 25, so the article that deals with allocation of public funds for state advertising and supply of service contracts. And this is, as I said, our sixth EMFA talk. Just to mention the next one, that will be the 5th of May, and will deal instead with Article 3. Article 3 of the European Media Freedom Act, with eminent speakers such as Mark Cole and Luigi Malferrari. Article 3 is the rights of recipients of media services, somehow the umbrella article for this European Media Freedom Act. So I give the floor to Tiana for her introductory remarks on Article 25, and thank you again, everyone, for joining our event.
Thank you very much, Elda. As we said, welcome all. We will have interesting presenter commentators. Kati's presentation is already, you can see it, but I will just shortly and briefly explain Article 25. So even though state advertising is important for providing relevant information by the authorities to the public, unfortunately, in many countries, it has turned into one of the challenges within media sphere. State advertising is one of the major elements of media capture, which is a situation where the media are controlled directly by governments, vested interests, or a combination of both. So these interests pursue media for political influence rather than profit. Based on the results of the Media Pluralism Monitor, in many countries it showed a trend of decreased transparency, political control, and it has been negatively influencing media market by creating an unequal playing field for media outlets. The latest 2023 MPM results showed that half of the European countries scored the maximum risk score. So it is really good that EMFA deals with state advertising and more specifically requires more transparency, fairness, and accountability in its allocation. It also pays more attention to the state advertising given to online platforms that also affects media markets substantially and has been financially endangering media outlets. So EMFA defines state advertising as public funds allocated for promotional or self-promotional messages, public announcements or information campaigns by public authorities or entities in any media service or online platform, normally in return for payment agreement or for any other consideration. There are three main points in Article 25. That state advertising awarded to media and online platforms shall be done in accordance with transparent, objective, proportionate, and non-discriminatory criteria made publicly available in advance by electronic and user-friendly means, and by means of open, proportionate, and non-discriminatory procedures. Member states shall seek to ensure that these yearly allocations of expenditure for state advertising is distributed to a wide variety of media service providers on the market, taking into account national and local specificities of these markets. One note is that public procurement rules remain unaffected. The second point and the second paragraph focuses on which data is to be published, and it should contain at least the legal names of the media service providers or online platforms from which the services were purchased, the legal names of the business groups to which media service providers or online platforms are part of, and the total amounts of spent per media service provider or online platform. In paragraph 3, national regulatory authorities or bodies, independent authorities within member states shall monitor and report annually this allocation of state advertising expenditure, and these reports shall be made publicly available in accessible manner. Some additional points is that the effectiveness of this article will depend on the implementation and monitoring mechanism within national legislations, which vary across member states. Article 25 covers state advertising, and this leaves space for sources of funding beyond advertising that may be used for non-transparent or discriminatory allocations, especially now that the area of state advertising is more tightly monitored. National regulatory authorities or bodies in member states that are in charge of monitoring and reporting might be captured themselves. So this is also a point. And it is also stated that the definition of state advertising should not include official announcements related to public interest, for example, related to emergency messages during natural disasters or health crisis. This is recital 13. It makes sense, however, this leaves room for potential influence and control of media if this exception is abused. So this is in short some points that we might later touch upon during the discussion. And without further ado, I would give floor to the presenter, Kati Cseres. Thank you very much for joining us from University of Amsterdam, and she will give you more insights on the safeguards of article that you can see on your on the screen now for you. Thank you very much, Kati.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm really happy to speak here. I don't consider myself an expert in media law, but I have been working over the past years on the intersection of competition law, concentration of power within media markets. So it's very interesting for me also to hear others about this topic. What I thought to discuss with you today is indeed starting from exploring the safeguards of Article 25 and state advertising in the EMFA. I would like to compare it and show you a few things. I think there are more than the things that I discuss. What lessons could be learned when we look at state aid law, and what lessons could be learned especially when looking at the situation of Hungary, but Gábor is going to speak as well, and he's the real expert on Hungary. But I think when we really discuss safeguards, what should be the way forward, what kind of guidelines, what are the contentious issues with regard to this article, then there is indeed quite a lot that a very long-standing and very rich case law within the field of EU state aid law can learn us. And that I say that also because very often when we discuss and read about state advertising, one of the things that pops up is indeed how to make sure that this is not become some kind of hidden subsidy, right? So this is where state aid starts, that it doesn't become some kind of instrument of political influence. And also I have been rereading this excellent study where many of you worked from 2022, which was kind of, I think, also a forerunner for the EMFA, And with regard to state advertising, one of the pools of criteria that was also emphasized is we need anti-circumvention criteria. And that's also in state aid law very prominent, how to make sure that states cannot circumvent the rules in that case in the treaty. And also with regard to state advertising, this study also emphasized that looking at empirics and many countries, or those few countries, apologies, that do have some kind of criteria, market-based criteria might be effective. So I think the case for this comparison is made. Nevertheless, there are, of course, very important caveats we should keep in mind. The EMFA is not just about the market-based logic. It's not just about the economic sustainability of media. It is very much about media plurality. So that needs to be kept in mind when we look at state aid law, where after all, the emphasis is on whether competition in the internal market is distorted. I think it could be interesting. I will not speak about it today, but we could discuss it, how the two complement each other, and whether in the legislative process that has been intentionally or very consciously thought about. In a way, both are ex-ante tools in an ideal world. What we see, of course, in state aid law is that if state measures were not notified, then it becomes an ex post investigation by the Commission with regard to allegedly unlawful state aid. So that's one issue, how this regulation ex ante, ex post enforcement could interplay. I think it's very interesting, and you already mentioned enforcement when we look at the EMFA, and I think from the perspective of Hungary, we are very skeptical how this will be enforced, that it's all on the shoulders of the national regulatory authorities and the monitoring that raises enormous questions. And one reason, for example, Gábor and his organization, the Mertek Monitor, did turn to the Commission because the Commission has a central role. It has very far-reaching powers. It can assess aid, it can investigate complaints from interested parties, and importantly, it can order recovery. So it's very powerful, and it can intervene indeed in a meaningful manner. And also for the media outlets, they can use that kind of decision to go to court and eventually also claim for damages if it has been established that there was a distortion of competition. So I think these consequences of non-compliance and enforcement in itself could be a topic. What I wanted to do today is just address two issues. And here you see a comparison where I pulled together Article 25 and Article 107 of the Treaty on paragraph 1, defining state aid, but even there, I just want to focus on two issues. And that is in the EMFA, the idea of public funds, an advantage which is directly or indirectly provided by public authorities. Starting with this, what are public funds? What qualifies an advantage? And do we know when states directly or indirectly provide this? Now, in the recitals, there are some more details about that. It should be a wide range of public authorities and entities, as recital 13 details it. And also in recital 73, we see that public funds should also be looked at, which are allocated to specialized intermediaries. Now, if we look at state aid law, then this actually is one of the most controversial issues in state aid law over the past decades. And that is the question, when can you impute, can you attribute a certain transaction to the state? So is it the debate in state aid law was, as the treaty reads, aid granted by a member state or through state resources, how to interpret these and what happens, for example, when state budget, state money is dispersed not by the state directly, but through some kind of intermediaries. Now, you can immediately use Hungary as a case study where this indeed very often happens, almost by now without exception, because private undertakings, advertising agencies are used as intermediaries. So there is a long-standing case law. There is a notice on the notion of state aid where the Commission pulled together a lot of this case law, and we see that it always comes back to this French case, Stardust Marine, where, as the case law today stands, the court and the Commission has to follow the guidelines on when is a measure imputable to the state. Now, there are a few important things here, and as you see, the court itself goes into this, how to make sure that the state aid rules are not circumvented. It doesn't matter whether what kind of body is providing that measure or aid. So it can be private or public. Where it comes down to, so also private bodies who are administering, who are deciding about those monies are important. What is important for the analysis, whether the state, whether we can attribute it still to the state, so it's state resources, and also the intention of the state depends on the control. So who is exercising the control, who has controlling influence over the resources. And again, back to Hungary, I think the Hungarian government often would say, well, look, this is not public money. It loses its public character also because advertising is not done by the state. It goes through private advertising agencies, and they put their hands up. I think there is a case, as also Gábor and his team try to convince the Commission that all circumstances and facts of the case, and again, in stated law, we see quite a detailed analysis of what can count, like the nature of the activities of that intermediary, its legal status, the intensity of supervision by the state, how control is kept, how that entity still is embedded or not in the public administration. It's a little bit longer list, but I think this could be used also. Of course, we have to think about it, that none of the case law stated applies immediately to the EMFA, but it does raise issues that I think needs to be thought about. What is public fund, and when can we say that it's directly or indirectly provided by the state? The second issue is not far away, so I concentrate only on this first paragraph of Article 25, and I don't speak about online platforms. The second is where more attention has been given is, of course, what does it mean? How do we design this transparent, objective, proportionate, and non-discriminatory criteria for the actual allocation of the funds? Now here I have seen that many countries already have ideas about transparency, but I think where state aid law could be especially helpful with the thinking is what is non-discriminatory. So how do we make sure it's non-discriminatory in the language of state aid law and public procurement? It would be an open competitive procedure. But where state aid law and the case law of state aid law comes in, because this is not in the treaty, just for clarity, is something that is called the market economic operator test. So that test is with regard to that little section that I put up here, that if aid is granted by a member state or through state resources, when does it distort competition? So when does it distort competition means also that it discriminates, it favors certain undertakings, and it disadvantages others. So this is the economic advantage element in state aid law. And in order to better grasp that element, this market economic operator test has been developed. And in the media markets, it can be translated into, has the state acted in accordance with market conditions? has the state acted in accordance of what a private economic operator in media markets, the private advertiser would have done. So it's a kind of a comparative test. Also, economists can use it in the sense looking at how private advertisers in the same market have been behaving and looking at whether the so as the state fund has been allocated, does it align with this with private advertisers, or there is some kind of distortion? And if there is a distortive, if it has been allocated in a distortive manner, then it is not according to market conditions and it qualifies as state aid. This notice on the notion of state aid very prominently also brings in, for this test, the application of the public procurement procedures. And it says that, look, if you apply the requirements, especially Article 18 of the Directive on Public Procurement Procedures, which requires a transparent, competitive, open procedure for auction tender procedures, then you can make sure that the allocation was also competitive and not distortive, and as such would not qualify as state aid. Again, I don't think this is a copy-paste element from state aid law, but I think as a test and as a line of thinking, it would be important exactly to establish whether the state has complied with market conditions in similar circumstances as a private advertiser would have behaved. And once again, for also thinking about and analyzing equal treatment between the public and the public sector operators and the private firms. So actually, this is what I planned as a little introduction. Once again, I think there are interesting other issues with regard to the enforcement. Of course, there we always have to be very careful because media pluralism and also the EMFA has very different legal basis, and the competence of the Commission is incomparable. In one, basically doesn't exist, and in the other, it's one of the most far-reaching, exclusive competence, which raises, I think, also a question that Gábor might speak about, why the state aid route has not been more, well, not used by the Commission, but more assertively also, for example, with regard to their complaint, why they have not accommodated that more actively. I have an explanation for that as well, but maybe that's good for to discuss later with the other speakers and the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kati, very much. And thank you for somehow leading for our next commentator, Gábor Polyák from Eötvös Loránd University, who will have the floor now. Thank you very much, Gábor.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me for this very important discussion. And in this time, let me add one more title to my affiliation, because Mertek Media Monitor is the NGO I work with for ages, also on the state advertisement issues in Hungary. So it's more important than my university affiliation in this point of view. I don't have a complete presentation. I try to speak about mainly three issues, because Kati also mentioned several times the Hungarian case. I just want to briefly summarize how it works and why it is important and interesting for you. The second question will be, so Kati also mentioned that we have an ongoing state aid procedure, what is not so promising at this point. I want to give very brief summary about the consequences of this procedure. And the last and most important question is if EMFA can be really a new tool in our hand for fighting against distorting state activity on the media market. Yeah, and Hungary, as at several points, how to say, we are the starting point of EMFA at several points. Several consequences of the Hungarian media situation from the last more than 10, almost 15 years can be found in the text of EMFA on a way. And state advertisement is the biggest problem, one of the biggest problem on the Hungarian media market, because state money, taxpayer money, is the driver of the whole pro-government media empire. And it is from this sentence totally clear that we are not speaking only about market distortion. The market distortion leads every time to the distortion of the public debate, the market of the opinion. And this is the biggest problem. Competition law and state aid law is a very can be a very effective way to hinder market distortions. I thought that it will be enough to come out from this situation in Hungary on the media market. Seems that I was too optimistic also in this term. But in the end, every time when we are speaking about the regulation of media market, let it be the media concentration or the market entrance, it is not about the market. It is about, first of all, the public debate and the quality of the public debate. And this is what is totally harmed in Hungary. And this is what led to several problems in the Hungarian democracy and rule of law situation as well. So the background, how it works in Hungary is not so difficult. Since 2015, we had a so-called National Communication Office. This is not an authority. This is just an office without strong competencies. The main competence of this office is that it makes public procurement for media agencies, and it buys the capacities of media agencies, and it makes contracts, but these are not case-by-case contracts. These are so-called framework contracts. It means that the winner of these procedures will have the exclusive right for some years, 3, 4, 5 years, to spend all of the state money on the advertisement market as in the form of state advertisement. So this is the first problem that also Kati mentioned, that it was so simple to hinder the state activity on the placement of state advertisement by involving media agencies. Even if the winner of these procedures are every time companies owned by one guy, and this guy is Gyula Balási. He was not an important player on the Hungarian media agency market. Now his media agency is not only one, but some of them, but all of them in hand of this owner, are the biggest players also of the Hungarian media agency market. So not only on the spending of state money on placement of state advertisement, but on the whole media agency market. What is, of course, again, can be seen at least as a distortion of another market, of the market of the media agencies. After that, this media agency or these media agencies will decide which media outlets are involved into all of the campaigns coming from all of the state players, let it be universities or ministries. So all public advertisement are managed by these media agencies. However, in our proceeding state aid proceeding, it was not very difficult to prove that the final decision, the final decision maker is the state itself, because we have some of these contracts that were made by the media agency and some media outlets. And in all cases, this National Office of Communication signed these contracts between the market players. So there is a proof that the state is involved to the end of this whole proceeding about the placement of the public money on the media market. I don't know, because we couldn't have new data, we couldn't have new public information on the contracts in the last years, if is also valid for the contracts made in the last some years. But in 2018, when we started our proceeding at the European Commission, that was clear that these contracts, all of the contracts about placement of state advertisement were made by a state act, made by or signed by a state authority. So in this case, that was also not a big risk in my eyes. Yeah, however, as I said, it's an ongoing proceeding that has been that started in 2019, and we are beyond two so-called preliminary assessments. And both of these preliminary assessments stated that our complaint is not profounded, and this whole situation cannot be seen as a breach of or a violation of the state aid law at European level. So, as I said, this framework contract is the main tool for placement of the state advertisement. And one last sentence or two sentences about the importance or the role of the state money on the Hungarian advertisement market. Once the Hungarian state, including all of the state-owned companies and state organizations, is the biggest advertiser at the Hungarian media market. It is totally unique. So I know that there are some problems in some other member states, but it is totally unimaginable that the state will be the biggest advertiser on the market, on the whole media market. The second one, that this huge amount of public money, it is not transparent yet. What is the real amount of this money that was spent as state advertisement? What we know is 2023, the amount, the so-called list price, this is not the real market price, but in the case of state advertisement, there is no big difference between the list price and the market price. So the list price spent on the advertisement market by state actors was 86 billion forints. It is 2.500 million euros. Without the money spent on the platforms, on the huge platforms. In the year of 2024, when, of course, you also had the election campaign for the European parliamentary elections, the Hungarian ruling party and its contributors were the biggest spender on all of the in all Europe on the Google applications, from YouTube to other Google advertisement, and most of these advertisers are also using public money. So Fidesz is also using public money as a party, but the pro-government media outlets that were also included into this amount are also using public money. So it's totally clear that we are speaking about a really huge problem. And now back to the ongoing proceeding. It is absolutely imaginable that in the end of this proceeding, we will have a decision of the European Commission that there is no problem on the Hungarian media market. It cannot be seen as a breach of state aid law. So it will be also, from the point of view of the politics and the point of view of public communication, a huge problem to say that this is not a problem. What is in Hungary going on? There was two very interesting arguments of the European Commission, what is also interesting from the point of view of EMFA, because as Kati mentioned, it will be very important to have these transparent, objective, proportionate, and non-discriminatory criteria for placing the state advertisement. And what will be totally new for the Hungarian situation, these criteria should be published in advance. We don't have any idea about this criteria, how the placement of state advertisement is happening now. However, I think the non-discriminatory way of placing of state advertisement is not so difficult to define. Yeah, so if you are an advertiser, you will look for your target audience, the audience who will be the best, who will be ready to buy your service or your product. In the case of the state, in the most of the cases, there is no real difference between the groups of the society. There is, so at least you cannot say that the ruling party voters are better target group of the audience than the ruling party voters. It cannot be seen as a legitimate differentiation between the target groups. So the only legitimate way to place the state advertisement is based on the performance of the media outlets. How many people are reached by the given media outlet, and sometimes if there are some specific issues of the given audience, then it can be also concerned. But mainly, you cannot find any really interesting differentiation between the target groups of state advertisement. Everyone wants to play with gambling issues. Everyone is interested in the current political messages. So even if it is about propaganda, of course, you cannot say so. This is the other problem not covered by EMFA. Several times, most of the times, the messages of the state advertisement are, of course, propaganda messages, but it is out of this discussion. So if you cannot have any evidence that this or that media outlet has better chance to reach the audience, then you cannot say that this or that media outlet will get much more money from the state advertisement incomes. And what we experience in Hungary, for example, we have two big private television channels, not the same, with not the same audience share, but very, very similar audience share. There are some percent difference between the audience shares of these two private televisions. And one of these private televisions got in 2023 5 billion of forints as state advertisement. That was RTL, you know, the brand. And the second one was TV2. It got more, almost 30,000. So yeah, 30 billion, sorry, 30 billion forints of state advertisement. So it's a huge difference, even if the audience share is very, very similar. I cannot see any argument to say that this is not a problem. And the European Commission tries, they wrote us that, okay, maybe the audience share is very similar, but there can be other criteria concerned by placing the state advertisement without any explanation. What kind of other point of views or what kind of other criteria can be seen? And if this is the interpretation of the European Commission, what can we expect from using the notion non-discriminatory placement of state advertisement? So in this way, under this interpretation, also the non-discriminatory way of placement cannot help on the Hungarian situation, but not only, of course, on the Hungarian situation. Yeah, what I wanted to say, okay, I try to come to the end of my starting votes. What is also very important, so my expectation, my hope was to find some strict limit, some hard numerous limit in the EMFA, or at least the proportional limits. How is the biggest proportion of the income of a given media outlet or a given media company that can become from state advertisement? There is no strict limit. And it means that everything will remain to the interpretation. And it is a huge responsibility for the Commission how to interpret these rather soft expectations from EMFA. And there are no sanctions. There are no way to enforce these criteria. There are no way to enforce of these rules in EMFA. It is written that the national regulatory body will monitor and report the using of state money on the advertisement market. It will be published, and what will be the consequence? There are no consequences if these rules are not enforced within the member states. We are back to the European Commission, because the only way to enforce these rules is go to the European Commission based on the state aid law, and our ongoing procedure is showing that is also not a very effective way. So we have the state aid law, and we have EMFA, and the intention is very positive, and the text is very positive, what I can read in EMFA. But I cannot see how it will really change the situation of the placing of state advertisement in a problematic state. If it is in everything if everything is okay in a state, then of course EMFA can improve the transparency and it will be good. But only the transparency, for example, in Hungary, cannot solve any of the problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Gábor, very much. I would ask then the next commentator, Oliver Money-Kyrle from International Press Institute, to take the floor.
Yes, thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me back. I mean, it's always great to follow Gábor speaking. He covers such a sort of thorough analysis and the best examples of the challenges that we're facing. But I'm always left feeling slightly pessimistic. You know, I always think that Article 25 is probably one of the most important articles in EMFA, and if this one doesn't work, then because it is so clear and so specific in its requirements for reform at the national level and for the rules that governments need to introduce to address this problem, it's probably the misuse of state advertising is probably the most obvious and easiest and simplest tool for media capture, as was pointed out at the beginning. Transparency over state advertising should be a straightforward requirement. It's very hard to argue against it. One of the arguments that the governments have leveled or used in the past is that we can't give away this information because of business confidentiality. I think that argument has now been very clearly dismissed. This is public money, public funds provided for private companies, and they don't have to accept the money if they're not prepared to accept the transparency around it. So I've always, worked hard on lobbying around this, and yes, we wanted stronger criteria, clearer sort of implementation powers and consequences, which are not there. I guess perhaps one of the biggest areas that we argued about was the threshold. Nobody's mentioned this, so I'll mention this, was the threshold that was inserted. I can't remember now if the original threshold that was inserted was that it only applies to public bodies or local governments with a population of, well, currently it's 100,000. I can't remember if the first threshold was it 1 million or was it 500,000? Yes. I don't remember now. 100,000. I mean, that was a substantial improvement, but it does not go nearly far enough. And what we know is that at the national level, for the big mainstream media, we see how governments have pressured TVN or Gazeta Wyborcza. There are very detailed analysis about how the government in Poland simply removed funds over the sort of 8 years of peace being in government. Actually, we talk about the transparency of the problem. A lot of this information is available. It is available if you go to the appropriate places, but it's distributed across so many different sort of reports within the government that it requires an extraordinary amount of perseverance by investigative journalists to trace this, where money has gone. And you can never have the whole picture, but we do know quite a lot. We know a lot about the situation in Hungary. We know, quite a lot about how the money was withdrawn in, what was abused in Poland. We know that it can have a significant impact on the financial figures of large media, but the large media can also sustain that. If it's only sort of 5 or 6% of their advertising income, they can sustain that themselves. Beyond that, there's this case in Slovakia where Markica has been particularly singled out in the past 18 months for the government threatened to withdraw advertising there. Markica is part of a very large conglomerate and actually could probably quite easily ride out not receiving those funds. There's another issue with Markica in the sense that its owners have other investments in other industries and have other public contracts. So there are other ways the governments can pressure through other companies the editorial line of Markica, and that is also something that's not addressed in Article 25. One of the things that we lobbied for was that there should be a threshold or some kind of limit on the amount of public funds that the owner of a media could receive if within a conglomeration of different companies and different industries, if there is a significant media company that is part of that, there should be limits to the amount of total public funds that particular conglomeration could have through public contracts in other sectors such as construction or energy or whatever it may be, and that's not in there. But coming back to the local media point, this is where the abuse is so clear. The ability of local government, they don't have to own local media to very simply and very effectively capture it through the misuse of public funds. So as with a lot of these things, Gábor, you're absolutely right to point out the limits of the implementation, but it does provide a real opportunity for us as we get government after government after government is rolling this out, for us to point out, well, this is simply the minimum that is required of EMFA. Here is an opportunity for you to go much further. So removing that threshold is one obvious one. Looking at extending the transparency requirements also to public contracts in other industries for companies that own significant media. That's another one. Strengthening the implementation powers. I'll come back to Croatia again. Croatia, the two things in the local media, there are all sorts of examples of how local mayors and local governments are able to effectively capture the editorial independence of local media through the use of funds. One of the things that the media regulator struggles with, there actually has quite strong transparency requirements in law, required both of media to report the funds that they receive, but also public bodies to report expenditure. The requirements are there, they meet the EMFA standards, but there are no consequences. There's no implementation power. If the public body decides not to provide that information to the regulator, there's nothing the regulator can do about it. So I think that's another area. There's a current debate in Poland about trying to make it illegal for local governments to own local media, and that's quite an important one, and I think that could be quite significant, but it won't be significant if they don't remove that threshold for transparency from 100,000, because the ability to still capture and influence the editorial lines of the local media is still extremely strong through these mechanisms. There's sort of one or two other things I wanted sort of bring up. So we at International Press Institute, we've worked with the Media Journalism Research Centre. We've done a number of reports covering, I think, 7 different countries over the past year, looking at different elements of EMFA, including particularly Article 25, basically any article related to media capture. And in all of those countries, not one of those countries, and it includes Finland here, interestingly, not one of those countries meet the EMFA requirements. But there are obligations involved, particularly around public tenders and public contracts. So there are quite often in many countries, there are quite strong requirements for transparency. But the way governments get away with it is, instead of allocating one large contract through a public tender, they go under the public tender threshold and offer multiple small contracts. So one of our recommendations is that threshold is either removed, or that when monitoring the receipt of funds, that any monitoring body does it on a cumulative basis. So that if you have a series of 1,000 or 5,000 euro contracts, that they would, supposing the threshold is 20,000, eventually it would hit that threshold, and you can monitor that so that it does actually finally come over that threshold. So the cumulative basis would be one way around that. Another sort of workaround that governments use, and I think that this has been mentioned, is the use of third-party intermediaries or the advertising companies. And I think it was referred to by both Kati and Gábor that the question of how can you judge the level of state or public interference in that. And I think we know very clearly that these are used to distribute funds, and that they are directed by, however they're directed, they can be directed by political forces to do that. So the solution to that is that the transparency obligations on public institutions should also apply to these intermediary parties. They should also have objective, non-discriminatory, transparent criteria, and they should share how those contracts are distributed. They should also be subject to that. I'm quite interested in this question of what these criteria are. We've got these 3 or 4 terms that it puts in, but actually in practice, what does that mean? And Gábor's given a couple of very good examples. It actually would be quite straightforward to do this. There is a body that they have to define this, they have to come up with this, and one of our demands would be that at the national level, any criteria should be developed in consultation with media stakeholders. So bring in the publishers, bring in the editors, bring in the journalists' unions, bring in some of the academics, so that they can agree on what this means and how it should be interpreted, and how we can, create a sort of arm's length, non-political decision-making process. So it's really important to bring in the local stakeholders to do that. I think likewise for the reporting, monitoring conducted by this NRA, the National Regulatory Authority that will be empowered to do this, they should also work closely with media stakeholders. And media stakeholders should be brought in to be able to review and comment on the transparency of those reports. So I think I've covered probably most of the points here. I mean, I think the other maybe in the talk the couple of things that may come up, but I think the other thing that obviously it's only just been touched on so far is that public funding is now going elsewhere. It's going to influencers and political campaigning, and I think obviously the European Union's transparency on political advertising is going to be really important in this area, and the transparency around these other points. So there are other elements that Article 25 simply doesn't capture, but we have to play catch up on that. So I think my sort of concluding remarks is that this is a really important article, that if applied, implemented properly, it can make a significant difference in removing these artificial barriers to the economic viability of media. It's absolutely fundamental to be able to do that. It will only work if local stakeholders monitor very closely how it's implemented at the national level. I appreciate that in Hungary you have a media capture so well established, almost regardless of what the rules are, we know how it will be implemented. But in countries where there's a threat of growing media capture, there is an opportunity to strengthen the safeguards if we tell the government, look, this is a good basis, but you can go further. We can make this much stronger. That has to happen. And then lastly, it goes, as is commented every single time, it comes down to political will. And at what point the European Commission wants to interpret whether or not this is worth taking up infringement processes or not. And that's also for us at the European level, depending on our partners at the national level to continue to do. So I want to be more optimistic, Gábor, and having these sort of sessions here, I think will help that. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Me coming from Serbia, I think we need optimism as well, not only from Hungary. And also thank you very much for mentioning local media because of their specific position and their more vulnerability. This is very important to highlight, so thank you for that. And now the last commentator I would call Renate Schroeder from European Federation of Journalists. And just to mention, if you want to ask a question or add a comment, you can either leave the question in the chat or you can raise a hand. So when our speakers finish, we can discuss with you some of the things that we raised or maybe something that we didn't cover and that you think relevant. Thank you. So Renate, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dijana. Thank you. I think I will be much shorter. There's already quite a lot being said. Very interesting, Kati, the reference to state aid. I mean, you said you're not an expert on media. I'm not an expert at all on state aid. So I think it's interesting to see them together. It's also interesting, of course, that the question of enforcement is much stronger when it comes to state aid, and yet we still face the problems in Hungary. But when it comes to EMFA, as we all agree, the question of enforcement is crucial and very difficult. And there I actually also have a question, because it's very often it's the national regulatory authorities, but not in all countries. It also says, or other bodies. So in a way, I don't know who could be doing that, but it would be very interesting to have a database and find out who is responsible for what. And then Oliver was mentioning the stakeholders, the structured dialogue with also academics and civil society and journalist organizations. We started that with the board. We also asked now the new board for a meeting. And I think all these issues, they are at the very beginning, of course. We only had a discussion on Article 17 so far, but all these issues will be very important to discuss with them, because we need the board to see this as an important article, all around transparency. I think that will be very important. To Gábor, yes, of course, we know, we always say, unfortunately, the EMFA is not made for Hungary. It's sad, it's a pity, but it will be very difficult. Nevertheless, we have to try. And just for information, the European Federation of Journalists will have its Congress this year in Budapest on 2nd of June, and we will have a panel on the EMFA, of course, and Anna Herold will be joining us. So we will ask some difficult question. I assure you on that. I think generally saying we all agree this is an important article. MPM has shown it in how many countries governments continue to wield state advertisement as a carrot to keep the media docile. And I'm also afraid from a political point of view, it will get worse. We all know we have problems in Bulgaria. They are also, interestingly enough, with European funds. Croatia was mentioned already, in Greece. So it's not only the sort of new member states in Greece, in Spain, in Malta. There are all many problems. Interestingly enough, the Czech Republic started with a national procurement strategy, now 24 to 28, to promote transparency and efficiency in public spending. And it will be very interesting, I haven't looked in detail at it, to see in how far it is in line with the EMFA. To talk a positive point of view is in Slovenia, our association told us, maybe it's the only country so far, I don't know, but they already, in a way, adopted Article 25. And because before, as you all know, there was also a lot of influence of political parties and the government on the media landscape. And the regulation will now also include municipalities, because the point Oliver mentioned was, of course, on my list as well, as we were all very concerned with that, and which finance local media and have total control over them. So our colleagues from Slovenia say, and I quote them, "We hope that the law will at least provide data for further analysis of how the money was spent and hopefully prevent the most obvious cases of abuse. But it will all depend on control." So here we are. We have in theory now a good law, a good amendment, and we still know, because we are all realists, unfortunately, that it is, of course, in the end, the political will, and we have to see how it will be going. But still, on a positive side, something has happened in Slovenia. We also asked our other affiliates, but most countries are still, at least don't have anything official out there when it comes to that. Yeah, so to be honest, and I think we all, maybe there are some questions, I really don't want to say much more. I think I put the questions online, of course, the question of what are public funds, but we have the recitals, and as always, we will need case law to see how it's happening. But I stop here because I think there are a lot of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Renate, very much. And I think Marko somehow, Milosavljević has raised his hand first, especially because you were mentioning also Slovenia. So Marko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, but I think Pierluigi was actually the first one, so I think he should have the first right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead, Marko. I'll speak later. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, first, okay, just by coincidence, you then later mentioned Slovenia. I can say only that this is nice in principle, but it's a very general article in the draft of the new mass media law, which does not provide the details. It is very similar to EMFA, and thus we have similar problem as EMFA has. And I think that one of the results of this discussion could be a sort of devil's advocate list of the worst case scenarios. I think that we all see a lot of issues with specifics, the small print of the implementation of this, such as lack of repercussions and penalties, the control, whether it is sufficient by the regulatory body, who controls that regulatory body, and so on. We also face, like in Slovenia and in many other countries, the problem of intermediaries, such as media buying agencies. For more than 20 years, we've had stories about the channeling of state funds from the government already in 2004 to specifically created media buying agency, which channeled the money only to government-friendly media outlets. But at the same time, I would like to warn that this is not a specific Central and Eastern European issue. Gábor was mentioning that, of course, the government in Hungary is the largest advertiser, but that is not the case only in some of the Central and Eastern European countries. I have an article from The Guardian saying that the largest advertisers in the United Kingdom already in 2000 was actually the state. So it is the largest single advertiser. And I believe that this is a similar situation also in many other countries. So this is extremely important issue. Now, what we see is, in addition, as I said, we could prepare a list of all of these issues, implementation and penalties and control and relying on supposedly independent regulators and goodwill of people and so on. You mentioned a few very important aspects, such as the data matrix and the independence of such matrix. What Gábor was saying, that the European Commission actually didn't respond to some of the issues about the TV channels, is probably the fact that what they were probably claiming is that perhaps in addition to the size of the audience, there were also some demographic reasons why a specific channel was chosen. And that is one of the problems, because in today's world, there is no universal data matrix for media, and even less for social media. There is a number of matrix. It's not just AGB Nielsen, and it's not just some other aspect. It is different in media because it refers to views, clicks, engagement, time units, and so on and so on. And then you can always claim that there are different specific demographics why you put some money in a specific media channel, such as local media channels, such as television station, and so on. And then the problem, of course, with social media is even worse, because there are even more different metrics for that, such as engagement, followers, subscribers, and so on. So YouTube has different metrics than TikTok, and TikTok different than in Instagram, and so on. So these intermediaries and the data will be very important. Otherwise, any government will find a suitable excuse why they placed an ad somewhere very specific. In addition to that, of course, there are many other, let's say, smaller print problems. I've mentioned this value and data matrix. I can only mention, of course, the EMFA emphasizes the importance of this research, but in the system in the United States has collapsed, for example. So there are different television channels fighting for audience from advertisers through different matrix. And it's a complete collapse of the media system. And that is also one of the reasons why so many advertisers then go to the social media and so on. And finally, I would just like to add, sorry for speaking so long, I would like to add another thing, which is the things that are not mentioned in the EMFA, not just about repercussions and implementation, but also about other aspects related to media purchases. I'm referring specifically to issues such as sponsorships and also subscriptions. Now, Kati was mentioning, of course, this as a concept of state aid, indeed. And Diana, you know the situation in Serbia, where there was actually sort of a soft research into the way Telecom Serbia is functioning as a form of state aid as the largest advertiser. And sponsorships and subscriptions may become a very relevant channel to fund friendly media outlets. We've seen some of these cases already. It is very untransparent, and with more and more digital media going for the paywalls and so on, including some very dubious media companies, but also some influencers, I think it will be extremely important to include the procurement of the media subscriptions, not just in a general state aid, but specifically to put some sort of more transparent requirements. And finally, since I mentioned transparency, sometimes I think we value transparency too much, but like in Hungary, it doesn't help much. And it's like Serbia. It's all very transparent, actually. Everybody knows things, and it doesn't help. So I think in addition to transparency, efficient control, and not just control, but repercussions and requirements by independent regulatory body and so on is extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco, very much. Next is Pierluigi, I think.
Yes. Well, I think that the point I wanted to underline is just one. I agree with many things were said. I see Article 25, but more generally EMFA as an issue of enforcement. The problem is that because it's a legislation that requires states to make decisions and to do things, it's a strange kind of enforcement, because it's not only an enforcement toward the behaviors of companies or whatever, it's an enforcement also towards states. Then I think that for instance, a case like the closeness between the state advertising ruling of Article 25 and the state aid legislation, the 107 of the treaty and so on, is very important because it's an example of how these things could or couldn't work. For instance, the fact that we had a lot of problems with the legal base of EMFA. We were strongly in favor, but we know that the single market, Article 114, the use of the single market was an issue. But now this issue can help instead, because the state aid legislation is based exactly on the same legal base. So the tools of the state aid legislation could be interpreted and probably used in the way in which also using the interpretation of Article 25 of EMFA, the indications that are behind that article. But let me say that I see this as a more general issue. All the digital acquis that we have, all the new regulations of the past 5 years of the European, of the previous Commission, will work only if they work somehow together. So it's a question of coordinate enforcement of this legislation based on the logic of what they are doing in a much more digital, interconnected world. So I think that the efficacy of this legislation will be linked to the ability to coordinate. So we are seeing one of the examples of this. And let me say that this is happening even more than we expected, even beyond the legislation, thanks to what is happening to competition and privacy. How a lot of cases in competition law become cases related to privacy, to the use of data, to the defense. So you see, the response to this transformation is also partially linked to how we are able to have all these laws, regulation working together. And enforcement is the key. But enforcement can be done only if the Commission is very brave in using all the tools, also in a creative way. That's my impression. Thanks.
Thank you, Pierluigi. Next is Kati, and then Roberta, and then David.
Oh, I'm also happy to give others the floor because I talk. But maybe just because Pierluigi just mentioned partly what I also wanted to say, and it's a response also to Renate, because you touch upon something that I really work on, and that's enforcement. And I completely agree that this should be, if you organize another event, I am again very happy to contribute, because I think there is a lot to be done. Indeed, the line of case law that we see and the developments with regard to so competition law, where enforcement is very strong, not just on the side of the Commission, but also on the local level. So what the competition authorities, how the Commission tries to converge them in terms of independence, a little bit on accountability, but not so much. And we have court case law from Poland, where the courts have made use, and this is my second point, not just the competition law data intersection, but where the court specifically made the link between the rule of law backsliding in Poland and the independence of the competition authority as problematic to the effective enforcement of EU law. So indeed, I think we should work a lot more on this, and there is nothing out there. I mean, and this is not just about Hungary and Poland, because in the Netherlands, I see the same thing. Renate, if you are asking who is doing what and who is responsible for what, in the Netherlands, it's the competition authority, for example, when it comes to media pluralism in a media merger. So basically, they are struggling now almost for a year to figure out what they should be doing, while their mandate is only on the competition law, but they have a case, a media merger, where they have to decide about media pluralism. So I think the theoretical, but also the practical interaction between these two areas, and indeed data and competition law, again, the court have talked about that there is a sincere cooperation between data authorities and competition authorities. And that has been indeed my creative thinking when you forget what is EU law and what are the legal constraints and competencies. I would say, why couldn't there be a sincere cooperation between competition authorities and media authorities? Because that's the way that EU law can enter, and there are principles that we know about mutual trust. And if that doesn't exist, then it can mean that a country like in the European arrest warrant cases can say, no, your authority does not compile with the EU principles, so you will be not part of the game. I know this is very far-reaching, but I think media, and you are all in this space, it makes us go that way, and we really have to think about it very creatively. So just another idea for the next webinar. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Kati. Roberta?
Thank you. Thank you, Tiana, and thank you to all the speakers. I wanted to follow following up what Pierluigi and also the last comment by Kati was at the interplay on the state aid and the Article 25 or EMFA. I think that I see that it can be a very good tool for the enforcement using these state aid rules, but I see some very strong differences in the, as Kati in her first intervention told, in the objectives, in the goals. So the market economic operator test couldn't work in this case because the same Article 25 says that the member states shall be ensure that the public expenditure for advertising goes to a variety and a wide plurality of media service providers. So it is not on the economic interest of an entity to guarantee plurality of in distribution of the advertising, and can also be another public goal, like think about the advertising on health issues. It's a completely different logic. So I see that I ask if this tool can be used for the enforcement, but not for the criteria, because I see this as a bit like not consistent with the overall goal of the EMFA. And then I have a question that is still on the intersection between economic and political issues. That is, which are the entities that are under the obligation of Article 25? It's public authorities or entities. Do you think, this is for the speakers, do you think that state-owned companies are among these entities? Not just state-owned at 100%, but also 20%, 25%, that can be a share that is very important, but it is not formally controlled. Because in this case, the conflict between economic interests and transparency because of public goals, it's still more evident. In the Media Pluralism Monitor, when we measure the transparency of state advertising, we include everything. And this is why, for example, a country like Italy, in which the central state is not a big advertiser, but the state-controlled companies are strong advertisers, there is an issue. And the issue, I have to add, it is not just the political capture, but also the economic capture. So but on the other hand, these companies can say, but we are private companies, we are listed on the stock exchange, you cannot ask us to reveal all our strategies when it comes to advertising and everything. In my personal opinion, there is a justification to ask them to do so, because in any case, there is public money and public interest in them, but there can be, in that case, there can be an issue of conflict with competition protection. So my question to who is more expert on Article 25 is if, in your opinion, the state-controlled companies are under this obligation, and in this case, how do you see these issues? Last comment is that we have in the scope of this article the online platforms, but on the other hand, the online platforms are not obliged to report about the money that they receive under Article 6, because just the media service providers will have this obligation. So this can be another issue, even though I think that in some of the intervention I saw like an underestimation of the advantages that can derive from transparency. Because in any case, transparency is a very powerful tool in the hands of the other competitors, of the civil society organizations, and of the also of the enforcement from the European Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. Would anyone from the speakers answer?
So, if I may,
yes, of course.
So, in my interpretation, there is a definition public authority or entity, and public entity is entity controlled directly or indirectly by a national or subnational government. So, in my interpretation, it should be interpreted as also the state-owned companies are under EMFA. And yeah, that's true that platforms don't have to report. However, the government should have. So we will know how the government used public money on the platforms, because they have to report about it as well, not only about using public money in the traditional media. Yeah, so that was the 2 points. And just one sentence to Kati and this question of enforcement, because yeah, it is an important question if media authority or competition authority, okay, but there is no sanction in the EMFA. It's even if we know which body is entitled to enforce, we don't know how. So there is this obligation to report about the annual spending of the government in the media market. But if the rules are not used, so if you cannot find any published criteria on the spending, if you can say that it was not non-discriminatory, what will happen? Nothing, because no of the entitled government is entitled to use any sanctions. You only have to opportunity to go back to the Commission based on state aid law. So this is a very interesting lex imperfecta.
Thanks. I think Oliver wanted also to answer, and then David, for you too.
I mean, I think it's an interesting question on how you define state companies. I'm not the legal expert on that, but I suspect there's an opportunity for a big research project there, not just in terms of control, but also on the flow of public funds, because public funds can be going to private companies and then redistributed. So I think, you know, if those public funds are being used, it turned into advertising. I think there's a good case that should also be part of the transparency obligations. I think in my head I've got this question of PKN Orlen, the big energy company in Poland, which I think is 20% owned by the state. So, you know, it's only 20%, but it is probably the biggest shareholder. Certainly it has effective control and is able to appoint the director, and therefore has effective control. So it's not a majority shareholder, but it's presumably the biggest, and it has effective control. So that, I think that makes a good case. Yeah, and I mean, and Gábor, in terms of the implementation, I mean, the way I interpret Article 25, maybe I've got it wrong, is that if there is a failure on the state to provide this, you know, these transparency reports and provide this information through the national regulatory authorities that are required to do so, then the Commission or the board can ask why they're failing, and it's incumbent therefore on the state or the government to introduce the sufficient powers to make it happen. So that EMFA doesn't define what enforcement powers there should be, but that doesn't stop governments introducing sufficient enforcement powers. That would be in addition to EMFA. I don't think it would be a breach of EMFA. It might be, depending on how. We don't want to over empower national regulators. We have to be very cautious of that. But that's how there's still the governments have to work out how they will implement it so that it meets the requirements, the outcomes defined by EMFA.
Thanks, Salvador. David, you can ask.
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, I wanted to a little bit further elaborate what Gábor might have not mentioned in his speech about this complaint. I was one of the author of the complaint Gábor was talking about. And the biggest disappointment in that case was mostly that the Commission, it was not that the Commission did not give us, how to say, so it was not the problem was not that the Commission did not agree with us. The problem was that the Commission didn't even start an in-depth procedure. So we, during the 5 or 6 years of this complaint, we tried to convince the Commission to start a procedure against the government of Hungary, and they didn't do that. And despite the fact that at the same time, the very same Commission in the rule of law reports raised several times the issue of state advertising and the distortion of the market. So that was one reason. The other reason was that in Hungary, the access to documents does not work as in a normally functioning democratic country. So to get access to documents is also very difficult. So basically, what we were expecting from the Commission to use its powers to do an investigation and to go into the details and check if there is state aid in these cases. Actually, there is an update that there was a court case against the Hungarian government and one of the investigative organization won that case, and the government would be or should be obliged to provide the public with data on the public spendings. And simply the government does not oblige with the decision of the commission, the court. And on that one, but let's say on a more positive note, although this is not replacing, the EMFA Article 25 is not replacing the state aid rules. In fact, it's weaker than they are. But at the same time, as I said, on a more positive note, I believe that that rule could be useful in a sense that it has, for example, one of the elements is that it has to be non-discriminatory. And if we are talking about non-discrimination, then the burden of proof turns around. And if I go as an NGO, at least it's my interpretation, if I go as an NGO against the government to court, then to prove that there was a discrimination or not falls on the government and not on me. So there might be interesting cases in which information comes out, and although again there I agree that the sanctions of EMFA, they are not exactly clear, but still the chances to make good use of this new article, I think it's important, and it's important in all the member states, not only in Hungary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm so sorry, but we ran out of time. Maurizio, you can send an email if you want to ask a question. We'll see if we can answer it. And thank you very much for this very, very interesting debate on Article 25. I will give the floor to Elda to close it, and looking forward to the next time we see each other on EMFA or some other activity. Thank you. Elda?
Thank you, Diana. You said we are running out of time. Indeed. Which address shall I use to? You can write to the MPF at eui.eu. Now, thank you very much, everyone. And it was extremely interesting indeed. When you were talking, I was thinking once again, of the role of the European Media Freedom Act as somehow an act that should create a common understanding and a common background to tackle some problems, both at national and European level. I do hope that this kind of conversation could help as boosting these reflections. And again, I do hope that also some let's say, a governance framework that is provided by the European Media Freedom Act can, in the long run, help creating a common ground and a common interpretation of the act. In particular, I'm thinking of the role of the authorities. Of course, there are many problems with the authorities themselves in terms of independence and efficiency. But on the other hand, I do hope that there could be also a means to share and define good practices to be implemented also at the national level, and to create again a common ground at national level. Thank you very much indeed, and to